Scott Bessent, former Treasury Secretary under President Donald Trump, proposed a plan for universal tariffs on U.S. imports starting at 2.5%, which would increase by the same rate each month, potentially reaching as high as 20%. The goal of this strategy is to allow businesses and countries time to adjust and renegotiate trade deals. Despite this, President Trump has voiced his desire for even more substantial tariffs, including on imported computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. Trump believes these higher tariffs would reduce imports and boost domestic manufacturing, with tariffs likely exceeding the initial 2.5%. Since taking office on January 20, 2025, President Trump has quickly imposed various tariffs targeting key U.S. trading partners, especially Canada, Mexico, and China. These measures are part of a broader effort to address issues such as illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and trade imbalances. On Inauguration Day, President Trump announced a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico. On January 30, 2025, he confirmed that the tariffs would take effect on February 3rd. He also hinted at the possibility of including oil imports from these countries if their prices are deemed unfair. This move aims to address concerns over illegal immigration and fentanyl smuggling. Canada strongly opposed these tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau indicated that Canada would retaliate with counter-tariffs on U.S. goods, ensuring that no single region bears a disproportionate burden. Ontario Premier Doug Ford suggested halting electricity exports to U.S. states like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota as a form of retaliation. A KPMG survey revealed that 81% of Canadian business leaders are willing to face short-term challenges from these countermeasures to secure a fair trade agreement. Trump, in a recent press conference, stated that the U.S. doesn't need Canada, claiming the U.S. could produce its own cars, lumber, and oil. He even suggested that Canada could become the 51st U.S. state to eliminate trade deficits and avoid tariffs. In response, Trudeau has said that all options, including energy export measures, are on the table. Canada has also ramped up efforts to collaborate with international partners like the European Union, Denmark, and Mexico, aiming to create a unified response. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly announced plans to work with British and EU officials to coordinate strategies against the tariffs. Her discussions will focus on retaliation and strengthening trade ties with the EU, particularly following the 2016 Free Trade Agreement. Mexico's President, Claudia Sheinbaum, has also criticized the tariffs, arguing that they won't solve immigration and drug trafficking problems and could harm diplomatic relations. Additionally, President Trump has proposed a 10% tariff on all imports from China starting February 1, 2025, in response to China's role in fentanyl production. Trump has also warned the EU that it could face tariffs if it doesn't increase its purchases of U.S. oil and gas, citing the need to reduce the U.S.-EU trade deficit. His policies extend beyond tariffs. He has expressed interest in purchasing Greenland, even considering military action to achieve this. In response, Denmark has reinforced its sovereignty over the territory, investing $2.1 billion in military capabilities to protect its interests in the Arctic. Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has been in discussions with European leaders to strengthen alliances against U.S. pressures, while Greenland's Prime Minister, Mute Egede, reiterated that Greenland's residents want to maintain self-determination. Meanwhile, the EU has been dealing with an unstable energy situation, worsened by crises in Ukraine and new U.S. sanctions on Russian oil and gas. To counter these pressures, the EU has been accelerating efforts to diversify its global trade, signing free trade agreements with Mexico and South American countries. A recent EU-Mexico trade agreement, finalized on January 17, 2025, aims to reduce reliance on the U.S. market. It eliminates high tariffs on EU exports to Mexico, boosting access to Mexican government contracts, and offers more favorable terms for agricultural exports. Similarly, the EU has secured a landmark trade deal with the Mercosur bloc, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, creating one of the world's largest free trade zones. This agreement removes tariffs on over 90% of goods traded between the EU and Mercosur, saving EU companies approximately €4 billion annually. However, it faces resistance from European farmers and environmental groups. French President Emmanuel Macron has raised concerns over the environmental impact, and called for additional safeguards. Despite the potential economic benefits, the EU faces challenges in ratifying these agreements, which will require approval from both EU and Mexican legislators and might take several years. These initiatives reflect the EU's strategy to safeguard its economic interests and strengthen its global position in the face of growing tensions with. Following World War II, the United States emerged as a global leader, actively shaping the post-war international order. Recognizing the growing threat posed by the Soviet Union, the U.S. took decisive steps to contain Soviet expansion and promote democratic values. In response to Soviet influence in Eastern Europe and actions like the Berlin blockade, the U.S. led the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949. This collective defense pact, which included the U.S., Canada, and several Western European nations, committed each member to mutual defense in the event of an attack. The United States played a crucial role, not only financially, but also militarily, by stationing troops in Europe and appointing General Dwight D. Eisenhower as NATO's first supreme commander. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman introduced the Truman Doctrine, marking a major shift in U.S. foreign policy. The doctrine declared that the U.S. would support nations resisting subjugation by armed minorities or external pressures, specifically targeting the spread of communism. Initially, this policy provided substantial economic and military aid to Greece and Turkey to prevent them from falling under Soviet influence, laying the foundation for the U.S.'s broader containment strategy during the Cold War. Complementing these efforts, the U.S. launched the Marshall Plan in 1948. This massive economic aid program aimed to rebuild war-torn Europe by revitalizing its economies. By fostering stability, the plan sought to create conditions where democratic institutions could thrive, reducing the appeal of communist ideologies. The success of the Marshall Plan further solidified Europe's alignment with U.S. policies during the early Cold War period. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, significantly strengthened military cooperation between the United States and its European NATO allies. The conflict highlighted the perceived threat of communist expansion and led to the establishment of NATO's Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in 1951, with Eisenhower as its first commander. However, the Suez Crisis of 1956 exposed tensions within the alliance. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, the UK, France, and Israel intervened militarily. The U.S., under President Eisenhower, opposed this action, fearing it would destabilize the region and push Arab nations toward the Soviet sphere. The U.S. applied diplomatic pressure to its European allies to withdraw, signaling a shift toward more independent European foreign policy initiatives. The Berlin Crisis of 1961 was a pivotal moment in the Cold War, significantly impacting U.S.-EU relations. When Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev demanded the withdrawal of Allied forces from West Berlin, President John F. Kennedy reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to the city. The U.S. took a firm stance against Soviet pressure by increasing the Army's authorized strength and doubling draft calls, underscoring NATO's role as a stabilizing force in Europe. Throughout the crisis, the U.S. supported European integration, seeing a united and economically strong Europe as a barrier to communist expansion. This support was evident in U.S. backing for initiatives like the European Economic Community, fostering closer ties among Western European nations. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, became a major point of contention between the United States and its European allies. While the U.S. escalated its military involvement in Southeast Asia, many European nations, particularly France, hesitated to offer support due to their own colonial history in Indochina and a desire to distance themselves from U.S. policies. The UK and West Germany showed varying degrees of public support but refrained from committing troops, reflecting a complex European response to the conflict. Economic tensions also emerged during this period, especially following the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s. Exchange rate volatility negatively impacted European economies, prompting European leaders to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar. In 1979, the European Monetary System, EMS, was established to foster closer monetary cooperation among European Economic Community member states, linking their currencies to prevent large fluctuations in value. During the Reagan administration, both Europe and the U.S. focused on economic liberalization and free market policies. Europe pushed for a single market, culminating in the Single European Act of 1986. Despite these alignments, trade disputes arose, especially over agricultural subsidies under the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a pivotal shift in global dynamics, prompting the European Union, EU, and the US to realign their relationship toward greater economic collaboration and peacekeeping efforts. This transition was formalized through key agreements that expanded transatlantic cooperation. In November 1990, the Transatlantic Declaration was adopted, creating a structured framework for political dialogue between the European community and the U.S. This declaration emphasized shared values such as democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, and laid the groundwork for regular consultations on economic and political matters. Building on the Transatlantic Declaration, the new Transatlantic Agenda, NTA, was launched in December 1995. The NTA outlined 4 broad objectives for collaboration: promoting peace and stability, addressing global challenges such as environmental degradation and terrorism, contributing to the expansion of world trade, and fostering educational and cultural exchanges. The NTA marked a significant advancement in strengthening EU-US relations, moving beyond consultations to coordinated joint actions. The escalating trade conflict between the United States and nations affected by its tariff policies, including the EU, Canada, Mexico, China, and others, could have far-reaching consequences. A unified response from these countries could severely disrupt the U.S. market, increasing inflation and adding financial strain on American consumers. Countries like China, Canada, and the EU, as major trading partners, have considerable leverage. A coordinated response could target critical sectors of the U.S. economy, including technology, automotive, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture, leading to higher production costs, decreased competitiveness, and difficulties for consumers already facing rising inflation. Prolonged trade tensions could reshape the global economic order. The U.S., while strong in certain sectors, is vulnerable due to its reliance on global imports. If these trade disputes escalate, they could not only harm the U.S. economy, but also foster greater cooperation among its trading partners. The long-term consequences could include reduced U.S. market influence, a fragmented global trade environment, and challenges to economic stability within the U.S. itself. Thank you for watching this video. We appreciate your support. If you found our content insightful, please like and subscribe to stay connected with our community. You can also check out another video on our channel,